Thank you for joining us. We are very excited for this. This is going to be, I think, a really wonderful workshop and very informative, very educational for you all. I just got to see just a couple of the clips and examples and things they're going to share, and it looks really interesting. So you're in for a treat. A couple of things to announce just before we begin. You may remember our outdoor concert from October of 2020, Voices on the Breeze, featuring some of our finest BSR member singers. That concert is now available for streaming on Sparrow Live, and it's available through streaming. You can purchase tickets on Sparrow Live. I'm going to give you the link for that, and it's available until February 21st, 2021. So it went up on January 21st. It's available for 30 days or about a month until February 21st. And I'm going to, again, put that link in the chat for you all. Second, we are holding virtual auditions. BSR's annual auditions are, of course, a valuable resource for many singers in the area. And we are very glad to be able to continue to provide this resource through a safe method. There's much more information on the website. I'll give you that link as well in case you're interested in learning more about the virtual feedback auditions and the way we're doing them this year. So here you go. And of course, if you are just joining us, let me just say that I put a couple things in the chat, a little bit of information about some of the other things that BSR has going on. And lastly, I wanted to add that if you are not a current Boston Singers Resource member, we would love to have you join us. You get, access to lots of programs like this, as well as some of the other wonderful resources that we're providing, and we're hoping to continue to provide more and increase our offerings. So if you would like to learn about becoming a member, or if you need the information to sign up, I will put that as a third link in the chat for you all to check out. So there you go. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's workshop creators and collaborators and our co-hosts tonight as well, Felicia Chen and Rose Hegele. I'm going to give you just a little bit of information about them. This information is also available on the website, BSR's website. And they also wrote a wonderful blog to accompany this workshop tonight that I really encourage you to read. And I'll give you that link later in the program. Towards the end. All right, so a little bit about them. Felicia Chen. Felicia is a dynamic vocalist and improviser with an affinity for contemporary sound art. Felicia holds degrees from Boston Conservatory, where she was a part of the inaugural class of the Contemporary Music Performance Graduate Program, and the University of California at Berkeley. Through her fearless approach toward the creation and interpretation of new works, Felicia eschews boundaries that limit the definition of music. A firm believer that classical music can be a catalyst for social commentary and change, Felicia frequently collaborates with composers, musicians, and poets whose voices are underrepresented in the field. Rose Hegele, a Canadian soprano, Rose Hegele facilitates artistically rigorous performance experiences that explore the extremes of human vocal and artistic expression in 20th and 21st century art music. She holds a master's degree in contemporary classical music from the Boston Conservatory at Berkeley and a Bachelor of Music degree in vocal performance and musical arts from the Eastman School of Music. Specializing in contemporary opera, chamber music, and improvisation, Ms. Hegele sings to create a space to heal souls and bodies and to allow humans to embrace all of their complexity and humanity. So, without further ado, Rose is going to get us started off. Thank you both, and here we go.
Hello, Zachary, thanks so much for the wonderful introduction. And Felicia, thank you so much for being such an amazing collaborator. And Boston Singers Resource, thank you so much for hosting us. We're both absolutely thrilled to be here tonight. It's such a privilege to present this work for you. And I'm going to let you look at a brief overview of the presentation. Whoops, one got that far. And so we're going to be starting off with an intro to extended vocal techniques. Felicia's going to talk about uplifting cultural awareness and individual agency. We'll then talk a little bit about composer-performer dynamics, navigating notation, and demonstration of extended techniques, and you all get to try them throughout, which will be really, really fun. And then we'll leave some time for a Q&A. So without further ado, let's get started.
All right, so the big question is, what is extended technique? What exactly is it? As classical singers, we get a lot of questions about, is extended technique harmful for the voice? Is it considered bad or improper technique? A standard textbook definition of extended technique is that it's often characterized as unconventional or non-traditional ways of singing in order to produce sounds that are atypical, which begs the question, atypical to what? What are we using as a measure of what is conventional or traditional? Think about the word traditional. It encompasses long-standing practices from cultures all over the world. So to say that a certain kind of vocal production is non-traditional, well, non-traditional to what? So in this definition of extended technique, I think it's important to highlight that we are viewing singing and the production of singing and the term extended technique through a very Eurocentric Western classical lens, which makes sense because a lot of us are taught to sing in this Western classical way. But it's important to highlight that it is a lens that has bias, and it is a lens that centers a very specific way of defining singing and defining music. So to expand on this very incomplete definition of extended technique, it can be superficially boiled down to anything that isn't bel canto singing or anything that isn't classical singing. And so a list of technique examples we have here include things as innocuous like speech, whispers, screams, and then we get to more interesting stuff, mouth percussion, whistling, yodeling, and uvular trills, polyphonic or multiphonic singing, which incorporates overtone singing and subtone singing. And also, something that's pretty accessible is different uses of vibrato, such as straight tone, normal vibrato, extreme vibrato and wobble, as well as different types of timbre. So there's the free bel canto singing that where taught is the desired timbre, but there's also breathiness and belting, chest voice, growl. All of these things can be considered extended technique through this Western classical lens.
All right, and so this kind of gets us started into one technique that we're going to look at. So vibrato. So vibrato, as I've discovered, is very hard to define, but the most concise definition I found is a regular oscillating change in pitch and amplitude, and it is quantified through the rate of vibrato, so cycles per second, and the extent to which the amplitude around a specific pitch changes. So as Felicia touched upon, there are several different types of vibratos. So being trained in the Western classical tradition, I guess my neutral is bel canto vibrato. So trying to get a free sound, ensuring that the larynx is low. So kind of like an Then you have straight tone. And something to keep in mind is that while straight tone can be very contentious, and Danya Kotak actually has an amazing doctoral thesis all about straight tone and vibrato, would highly recommend that you all read it. What's interesting about straight tone is that it's actually the same vibrato oscillations that are happening in regular vibrato, but because they're happening above 7 cycles per second, you only hear one tone, as opposed to this frequency that's kind of going up and down like that, even though it's just happening, but on a much smaller level. So to demonstrate. And then we have fast vibrato. And so when I try and do vibrato quickly, I really think about vowel. And so you've been hearing me sing an E for all that, so I am going to place my E a little bit more forward. So like E, and then a slow and wide vibrato, I would put my tongue a little bit back, depress the jaw a little bit more for like an. So you can hear all of those different things changing. And now we're going to do an activity looking at John Cage's aria to see how we can explore all of these different types of vibrato and even more timbres in a musical context. So, aria is a piece written by John Cage in 1958 for Kathy Barbarian, and it consists of non-standard graphic notation where he uses different colors to delineate different vocal timbres. In terms of timing of the piece, each page is lasts 30 seconds. And for pitch, you basically look at the position of where the different drawings are on the page. And there are also these little black squares that represent non-musical noises. So if you're looking at this description, you may realize that there are some very problematic things with it. So Cage writes, these differences represent 10 styles of singing. Any 10 styles may be used and any correspondence between color and style may be established. The one used by Miss Barbarian is dark blue, jazz, red contralto, contralto lyric, black with parallel dotted line, Sprechstimme, black equals dramatic, purple equals Marlene Dietrich, yellow equals coloratura and coloratura lyric, green equals folk, orange equals oriental, light blue equals baby, brown equals nasal. And for the black squares, for the especially problematic one, the one which Miss Barbarian chose for her interpretation, as UGH, as in suggesting an American Indian. So today, in our context with our lens, we understand that Oriental and as suggesting an American Indian are extremely problematic, caricaturizing terms. And so, as a vocalist, we have to reconcile the fact that the first performer of this piece used these terms based on her own cultural context and understanding. And so, what I would encourage you to do is, if you're looking at pieces and scores such as this that have these different elements to it, is to really understand that you do not have to have a Kathy Barbarian interpretation. While she was the first performer of this piece, the styles that she established are not the be all end all of style. And it is really up to the individual performer to find timbres and colors that they are comfortable using, both from a vocal standpoint and also from a cultural awareness standpoint as well. And so I think it's just really important that we keep our current frame in mind and that we definitely look at the score and Miss Barbarian's interpretation specifically as a relic of the time, but not something which we want to continue perpetuating harmful stereotypes of today. So the actual score itself that we're going to be having fun with. So as you can see, there are various different colors on here. There's a brown, there's a dotted line, little tiny black line, yellow, light blue, red, purple, dark blue. So I was wondering if we could take the next maybe 2 minutes to just look at these for ourselves and figure out what timbres we want to use. And then we can all actually try them out on mute. And at the end, I can demonstrate what I've come up with for this. And if any of you actually wants to demonstrate your own interpretation of aria, you can feel free to do so as well. So let's take some time to decide on some timbres. So I've done that a few times, and if you would like, I can demonstrate my interpretation. And if any of you feels comfortable volunteering your own, please feel free, but know that there is absolutely no pressure to do so. So my interpretation of this page of aria. Pustia, the burning bush, will you give me to tell you? Just sang. No, it is birth, but is love that shall continue breaking the shell, far removed at rest. So in that I use straight tone, breathy straight tone, wobble, vocal fry, some Sprechstimme, bit of an MT style. Would anyone else feel comfortable volunteering their own interpretation? Felicia, if you would feel comfortable.
Yeah, sure. It was really fun actually to see it when everyone was on mute, to see everyone's who's on video, their mouths moving and trying out new things. So I'm really, really glad to see your faces participating. So yeah, this will be my interpretation on the fly. Bustia, the burning like bush. Oh, what will you give me to tell you? Usnia Junior, bananas, a love that shall continue breaking the shell, far removed. So you can see Rose and I incorporated a lot of different vocal styles. I think Rose did a lot of like very like standard like contemporary classical styles. I did like a few more pop styles, and so you can see like all of these, you know, different interpretations. It's really just up to the individual, and that's what makes these this kind of music so exciting. It gives you the framework to inject your own personality and individuality into it. So moving on, I wanted to uplift this concept of cultural awareness, as Rose had talked about with John Cage's piece written in the mid-century. There's a lot of problematic things about it because it was unfortunately a relic of the times. And so to give some background about my thoughts on cultural awareness, the voice is a extremely unique instrument. I mean, I think we can all agree, and that is ubiquitously accessible, right? We humans all have vocal cords and use them. And it is highly individual. The voice is highly individual. Our voices change throughout our lives, but they're also formed and informed through our upbringing, the languages and musics and sounds that we're surrounded by from birth. And in our increasingly globalized society, we're exposed to the riches of cultures all around the world. But the downside is that can lead to appropriation, reduction, and stereotypes, or in other words, I usually put things pretty bluntly, cultural colonialism. So there's a lot of methods of vocal production that we think of as extended techniques that are actually heavily used in global classical and folk musics, sacred and secular, and are often mastered through years of prolonged training and immersion. That being said, there's also a lot of performers and creators of new music, especially in the Western world, that are inspired by different cultures. And so I encourage all of us to tread sensitively when being influenced by other cultural practices and understand the ramifications of incorporating influences from a modality that is not your own, especially if people from those cultures have been subject to racism, colorism, genocide, colonialism, and erasure. how are you incorporating your source of inspiration into a performance or composition? Is it loosely defined? Is it an imitation? What is your relationship with that culture? And are you claiming ownership over something that is not your own? So I just wanted to show a few examples of extended techniques that we listed at the beginning that are actually very prominent in global musical practices, both traditional and contemporary. So this next slide is a clip of a Mongolian throat singer, Batsorik Vanchik. And throat singing is actually very characteristic in several indigenous cultures, from Mongolia to Japan to the Inuit of North America. And in more pedagogical terms, throat singing is really a method of multiphonic vocal production, meaning it's not one single note, but many notes, which I think in Western classical music for vocalists, it seems sort of inaccessible for us to do, but it is physically possible. And so in throat singing, what's happening is you're doing multiphonics through subtones. So you're singing a tone, and the resonance of the throat actually produces pitches below what you are singing. And in this clip at the very end, you'll also hear another technique, ululation, which is towards the end of the clip. Isn't that awesome? So the next clip I wanted to roll is a song. And this singer is Siki Joanne. This is a song from South Africa. This is a South African singer, and it's sung in the native language of the Xhosa people. So a common extended technique is the use of the mouth and the voice as percussion, but the Xhosa people speak a particular language, which is actually a language that has clicks in it. It's a language that has vocal percussion built in. So I raised the question, how can this be an extended technique if the method of vocal production is like embedded in the language of the song? And again, this is just to highlight the very like Western classical lens that we tend to categorize things. But this is amazing.
Lama abimba la kata makata kakashwa zingo 20 Lama abimba la kata makata kakashwa zingo 20
And this final clip I want to show you is just an example of really amazing beatboxing by Razal Manley Brown, who is a former member of the amazing Unparalleled Roots crew. And this to me is an example of vocal percussion at its finest. So as we emphasize uplifting cultural awareness through our musical practice, we also need to lift up our individual agency as artists. You know, as you saw, all of these singers were utilizing different methods of vocal production in a way that seemed so effortless. So what happens when you want to use some of these techniques and incorporate them into a new composition? One thing I would like to emphasize is that unless a singer is already intimately familiar with methods of extended vocal production, either through their training or their cultural upbringing, asking the singer to engage with extended techniques is often a request to take them out of their comfort zone. So composers should be realistic about a singer's individuality. You know, there's a lot of uniqueness that we bring to the table because we all have a very unique voice and a very unique skill set. And like, we as collaborators should really embrace that wholeheartedly. Building upon that, singers also have every right to exercise their own boundaries, to take into consideration like what physically feels good and what feels bad, but also to consider how you feel emotionally, how you feel mentally, how you feel morally. If you feel like you're handed a composition that is inspired by some kind of cultural practice, and you feel like it doesn't do that cultural practice justice, or in fact is reductive, then you have every right to push back with the composer and encourage them to really think about uplifting cultural awareness in their own artistic practice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Felicia. That was really, really amazing. And I completely agree. And I think this part, just building upon that, I think it's really important to address composer-performer dynamics, because when a composer and especially a vocalist are working together, it's not always it's not always an easy interaction. And so questions to think about, especially for the singers in the room, is how many times have you been told to do what's on the page? That your interpretation wasn't the correct interpretation? And especially, how many times have you been talked down to or made to feel like you are an inferior musician because you are a singer? And within the composer-performer relationship, there are a lot of power dynamics that go on. And I think one of the things is that, especially within Western classical music, there's this myth of the genius composer and the performer not having their own agency, not having their own awareness, but simply being a vessel for the composer, and their sole purpose is to realize intentions. And then, in addition, just talking about each of us with our own identity, we are influenced by larger societal power dynamics, especially of white supremacy, sexism, and classism. And for those of us who do have privilege in certain areas, I think it's really, really important that we are extremely mindful of those dynamics, of our own identities, and especially if we have privilege in certain ways, like that we really reflect on our own privilege, and that we do our best just to communicate well, be very, very mindful, own up and take responsibility if we do make mistakes, and really just try and create a safe space for collaboration. And so much of this comes down to clear communication. So intent, notation, and process, and a combination of all these things. And I think what's really important is taking this myth of the genius composer and the performer, especially singers, who are oftentimes looked down upon compared to instrumentalists. I mean, on a side tangent, a lot of us begin our training later in life. A lot of us might not start playing the piano at the age of 4, and we might not be able to read music until much later in life. And so as a result, there's this myth that, oh, singers are not as good musicians as instrumentalists, even though that's a complete lie, and we have so much uniqueness to bring to the table. So that being said, viewing ourselves as equal collaborators and the performer being a co-composer as well, it creates this environment for experimentation. And so, for instance, if a composer suggests a technique that might be uncomfortable, one time I was asked to do aggressive vocal fry, so and personally I was like, that doesn't feel good. We bounced ideas back and forth and came up with, okay, what about expressive vocal fry, so and similar timbre, but it meant that I was able to do it much more safely. And in that sense, viewing the score as fluid and really writing for your individual singer's strengths rather than taking this one-size-fits-all approach, it's awesome. And it really gives both the composer and performer agency, and it creates this really authentic and exciting performance experience for all. And personally, it's so fulfilling when you're able to have those dialogues and when both parties work together to create something rather than this whole performer being a vessel thing. All right, so.
All right, so now we get into some of the nitty-gritty practical matters. Notation. So what we commonly digest as a musical score is notation that was developed for the practice and preservation of Western classical music and Western sacred music in particular. So how does one notate different timbres, different means of vocal production, unpitched sounds, multiphonics? Composers will often develop and provide their own notation key and instructions to indicate their intent, but a lot of it's still pretty unclear and up for interpretation. So one of the biggest challenges of navigating a contemporary score with extended technique is that there's an overall lack of standardization. Although, to be fair, there are some commonly utilized extended techniques that have sort of settled into a standard notation. So if you want to go to the next slide, here's just some examples of keys that composers provide at the beginning of a score. So there's Kaya Chernowan and Kaya Sariaho. And so actually, if you look at the key itself, like the symbols are pretty intuitive, right? Like a black note head is a sung pitch. An X note head is spoken. I'm sure we've seen that in a lot of scores, from like the most difficult contemporary music scores to contemporary choral works that are pretty accessible. Like these are things that are pretty readable, right? We also have like the wiggles in both composers' keys that indicate either some kind of like vocal fluctuation, whether it's a vibrato or a vocal fry. And then kind of specific just words, just prose on like what you want, what the composer wants the timbre to be. So like HT for head tone, BC for bocca chiusa or closed mouth, SV for senza vibrato. Composers can really approach their descriptions of timbres in different ways, and so really what the key is to provide a key. So this is just a more like kind of standard layout that you'll see in extended technique. But if we go to the next slide, this is just a collage of different ways that composers notate for the contemporary classical singers, all extended technique. We have some snippets from John Cage's aria over there. At the very top, you'll see these like X note heads for like kind of vocal percussion sounds. Right smack in the middle, there's straight up note heads, but they have little X's on the stems. And so it's pitched material, but this is commonly known as Sprechstimme, which we'll go into later on. But that's actually one of the very standard extended techniques that has made its way into the canon and thus has a somewhat standard notation now.
So now we're going to do some more demos and then some more activity-based things. So this will be really fun. First off to start with is mouth percussion. So you heard some amazing mouth percussion in the examples that Felicia showed us. And personally, in my approach to mouth percussion, so it's really about exploring the articulators, so the lips, the teeth, and the tongue in creating these rhythmic gestures. And the thing about them is that while the focus is a lot on consonants, whether they're voiced or unvoiced, like p, k, sh, t, vowels are super important in providing color. So for example, a p will sound very different from a p, sound very different from a p, so very different from a p. And so really embracing the vowels and thinking about shadow vowels is really, really useful. In terms of notation, oftentimes singers, international phonetic alphabet is used. It's not the exclusive thing, but if you're already familiar with IPA, it's really, really fun because you get to put your previous knowledge that you might use for your translation from the Nico Castell book to good use in a totally different context. And then here in this specific score sample is one of my favorite extended techniques, so a mouth pop. So basically to do that, you close off the vocal tract, make sure that you're not expelling air, like not like a puff, but that you're just letting the lips come together and then releasing on a soft puff. So this specific score example is Eringi's Mouthpiece 1. And as you can see, she has some standard notation. I mean, there's a 5-line staff, but just going through the different symbols because I'm going to want all of you to do a little bit of experimentation with this on mute, of course. So first of all, you have a sound. So slight, starts on a G3 or honestly, whatever note feels most comfortable in your range. Do not feel tied to the starting pitch. And so it's slight descending glissando. Half circle above the note indicates that the tone should have half air and half pitch. So I like to think of like maybe a gentle, like a gentle purr sound. Like all those note heads that don't have an actual pitch in them, so they're white, but it's just the outline. And as you can see, sounds without pitch. And then for the popping sound, she says, close throat passage, but leave nasal passage open, then make a popping sound with the lips by slightly pressurizing the mouth cavity, then releasing the lips. The mouth should be in the shape of like an vowel. But in this specific excerpt, there's no instead there's a p type thing. So I will just go through it once, but I'm going to give you a few minutes to really take your time with it, have fun. And I will say, do not feel compelled to go at quarter equals 120. Feel compelled to go as fast or as slow as you'd like with it. But to give you a small example of how this sounds. I forgot to mention there are whistles as well in this score. So it's oftentimes can feel very acrobatic, but I hope that you enjoy just exploring this at your own pace, starting at whatever pitch is most comfortable for you. Wonderful. It's so exciting to see, for those of you on camera, just having fun with this notation and playing with it and seeing how it feels in your voice. If any of you want to volunteer, feel free to show your own exploration with it, but as always, no pressure at all. If you want to keep going ahead, just let me know. Awesome. So here we have another example of mouth percussion, and this is one of my current obsessions. This is Anthony Green's score P is 4, and as you can see, he's outlined the shape of a giant P, and he's exploring vocal percussion, but as you can see, it's very much through a graphic score type lens. So the X's are sounds, and those tiny circles that you see represent smaller whispers. But in any case, I just wanted to show you a very different approach to notation. And on the actual score itself, Anthony does have a key. So if you're interested in performing this piece, I would suggest reaching out to him and inquiring about purchasing the score. It's really, really cool work. I love it. I love all of the p sounds in the different ways that I think Anthony's actually performing this piece himself. So the different articulations and the fact that he like lets more air release on the final few ps. So next up, we're going to touch back on vibrato, timbre, and trills. And Felicia and I are going to demonstrate a few different timbres and trills for you. So talked a little bit at the beginning about how you can use vibrato at different rates and straight tone as well to create all sorts of lovely vocal timbres within vibrato itself, not listed here, but there are several different types of vibrato. Definitely check in with your voice teacher as things like laryngeal vibrato, where you literally move your larynx up and down to create a note, or jaw vibrato, shaking your jaw to create a note. They may object to that, but of course you have your regular bel canto, you have the straight tone, fast, slow, and wide. And on this excerpt, actually on the right of the screen, that from Hegele Chunwan's Manual Hadia, something you can just play with is actually taking a pitch in your own voice and experimenting with going molto vib, so slow vibrato, to back to normal vibrato, keeping that normal vibrato, but adding a little bit of an, I think, head tone, airier sound, and then fluctuating, as she said. So trying fast vibrato, trying slow vibrato. So let's take a few minutes just to play with that and really experiment with vibrato at different rates. And I should mention, choose whatever pitch in your range feels most comfortable to you, and really enjoy playing with fast and slow vibrato and straight.
Actually, it's for both new and existing customers.
All right. Getting into timbre. So timbre is so fun, and I like to describe it as the color of a voice. So we can do breathy, where we let more air escape from the vocal folds. So thinking like a ha or a hoo, and you can even use vibrato with this. So ha, and then you have your belts. So for those of you who sing musical theater, you're very familiar with this. I like to access it through a nay, 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 or a nya, 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 or the classic, hey, taxi! That kind of New York, very bratty energy under the eyes, jaw lowered. So a smile, but a relaxed jaw type thing. So feel free to experiment with that if you'd like. And Felicia, if you could talk about and demonstrate growl.
Yeah, so growl is actually very similar to the subtone singing that you heard from the Mongolian traditional singer earlier. So growl uses throat and chest as resonance to color the voice, and it's commonly used in like traditional blues and soul. And I mean, actually, it's used all the time in popular music and in musical theater now, and also in heavy metal, which is actually more sustained and very akin to throat singing, funnily enough. So I think of growling kind of like purring like a cat, not like tongue, like grrr, grrr, not like that, but like actually purring like a cat, feeling your insides vibrating. So I would start by just heavily breathing or almost wheezing in your chest. So this kind of like, and really feel that resonance in your chest. And then activate your like lower vocal folds and feel them vibrate along with your chest. So then you get the like and that's really how you start to do the growl. And like I said, it's often used in like coloring a line in popular music, but it's also used like the Mongolian throat singer, like. So I'm going to bounce it back to you, Rose, for trills.
Awesome. So yeah, that was awesome. So trills, we have so many different types of trills. For those of you who are singers in the room, you probably have experimented with tongue trills, especially trying to get those Italian double R's, so the r type thing. For those of you who have trouble with it, it's like saying b b b b b b b b b, so a D, but very, very, very quickly. And for flipped R's, which are kind of the beginning to getting that trilled R, so r, 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 and then you push air through and then just let it roll. For lip trills, many of us vocalize on these, so really, really good vocal warm-up, very fun to use. Ululation, so I like to think of this one as the pigeon cooing. So you know the uvula at the back of your throat, you push air through that, and then it wiggles back and forth, and then you get that nice little pigeon sound. And then the breath tremolo, which is pretty prevalent in early music. I know Felicia mentioned earlier that Boston has a pretty extensive early music scene. So I first heard of these a few years back, and so for breath tremolos, you do, I would say, to think of laughing. So and then get that same sensation, that same energy from there, and then go or like and so it's kind of this trill thing, but then the air is it feels very bouncy. The air is kind of like going boom, 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 the sound. So.
And they're often known in the early music world as goat trills.
Yes.
Because they kind of have that like braying of a sheep or a goat. Ha ha ha.
Awesome.
All right, so now we're going to get into another layer of multiphonic vocal production, which is overtone singing. And this is actually something that is very, very accessible for classical singers because it doesn't require like that resonance of like the chest and the lower folds. And so, you know, there's not that fear of abrasion. Like you're basically just using your headspace as resonance, which is what you already do for bel canto singing anyway. And so this next activity, this score is from Richard Felciano's The Seasons, which is actually a choral piece. And this is from the movement Summer. And this sort of static nature of the sounds that you'll hear is really to evoke the kind of like stillness of like heavy heat and the buzzing of insects around you. So in this notation, it actually looks quite a bit like how you would notate upper partials in string writing with these diamond note heads above the note that's being played. So to translate that into Singerland, that there's a whole note that's being sung, and that is on this ooh vowel, so ooh, ooh. And then you'll see in these little, in the cells, there's the ooh above the straight line at the bottom, and then underneath it, there's another vowel. There's ah, eh, and e. And so basically how you produce overtones is you hold that ooh with your tongue down and relaxed, and you begin to think about the other vowel sort of being superimposed onto that ooh. And so when you do that, your jaw is still very relaxed and downward, but and your mouth is still puckered in that ooh shape, but it's really your tongue that's giving a hint of this superimposed vowel. And so the most clear overtones are the ones where the vowels are in extreme opposite directions, so ooh and e. So I'm going to demonstrate, and please feel free to experiment as I demonstrate, and I guarantee you'll be just doing this walking down the street because it's a lot of fun. So we'll go ooh, ee, ooh, ee, ooh, ee. Those are the two shapes that we're looking for in our resonant space, right? So then we superimpose the e on top of the ooh. Ooh. And I can play with the contour of the upper partials by just ever so slightly changing the shape of my lips or moving around my tongue. And then you can start to experiment with, instead of superimposing the E, superimposing an eh or an ah, and you'll get access to different frequencies. So this is super, super not harmful at all to the voice, and it's a lot of fun, and it's just a way to access this different area of your voice that you may not, have thought to access before. And now, lastly, we're going to talk about kind of the OG extended technique in the Western classical tradition, which is Sprechstimme. And so this is a piece written in 1912 called Pierre Lunaire. This is the first movement of Pierre Lunaire by Arnold Schoenberg. And so Sprechstimme, we saw like a little example earlier, but Arnold Schoenberg notates Sprechstimme as specific notes, specific pitches with little X's through them. And his instructions say to observe the pitch, but to not sustain it, and to treat the approach and the decay and the departure from the pitch as if it were speech. So when we talk, we don't sustain pitch throughout all of our words. We don't sustain breath through all of our words. There's always this arrival and leaving of every single syllable that we say. And so the general practice for Sprechstimme is to maintain the pitch, or at least like kind of like the area in the voice where the pitch might be, maintain the distance between each of the pitches, so that the contour of the line like maintains its integrity. But as far as like sustaining a pitch or making it sound like it's sung, to really like not be very precious about it at all, and to treat it very speech-like. So how I would approach this piece would be like this. Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt, gießt nachts der Mond in Wegen nieder. And so you can see I'm kind of integrating speech and pitch material, but not really observing one or the other in a dominant way. And there's different ways that people approach Sprechstimme. There's different ways that composers want Sprechstimme to be delivered, which Rose will talk about next, but it really is just a way to express your individuality.
Exactly. Wonderfully, wonderfully said. So, as Felicia touched upon with Sprechstimme, there's so many different types of notation. So here you have, at top you have the Hayat Manuel Hadia, and she does notate specific pitches. And so how I would approach this one would be going from the starting pitch to the ending pitch. And so that would be a low E, like zo. And then the last pitch would be this C natural, and then really trying to get the contour of that phrase. So zo, so really going at it from a place where you know where you're going, but there's room for flexibility in the middle. Here in Nikhil Singh's How These Words Happened at the bottom of the page, you can see that he chooses not to use the 5-line staff, but instead uses one single line. And the Sprechstimme, you kind of have to go about it by interpreting the relationship around it. So how I would approach this personally is that I would decide, okay, where is that center of the line? So let's say in my range, let's put it around an A440. And what is the highest note in this? Let's say maybe an E or an F, and then the lowest note, low A. And then from there, really, rather than trying to match it out, so like A, G flat, D, E, not thinking that specifically and more just getting the contour. So it would be like, monstrous alliances never dreamed of before began. Sometimes they last. Really, really fun. But then, yeah, just being, allowing yourself to play with it, not being overly specific and not overthinking it, just allowing gesture and contour to really lead the way, but having signposts that give you direction and a place to rest. So we are officially at the end of our presentation. We really hope that you enjoyed it. And please, by all means, ask questions. And Felicia and I would be more than delighted to provide even more insight.
I see a hand up.
Hi. So I was wondering, first of all, great presentation. I really enjoyed this, super informative. I was wondering, what are the extended techniques that could be viewed as harmful for the voice?
I mean, I think it's a pretty complicated question because, again, like it depends on, you know, the individuality of each singer. So, but just I think for a typical classical singer, anything that really pushes the physical extremes of the voice. So, for example, like as a composer, right, you wouldn't write something that stays up in the stratosphere for a really long time for like any soprano, because they would hate you forever and it's really tiring. So that being said, things like subtone singing, where you're really like manipulating different parts of the vocal folds that you don't normally access, I think that for a lot of people can be really tiring because it can be pretty abrasive as well. There's also like, again, depending on the singer, right? Like asking to do mouth percussion depending on how you write it. Like if you're writing something that's sort of like beatboxing-esque, it might actually give a singer like jaw tension because of like the way that the music is notated, right? Because of the sort of mental and physical toll that it takes on trying to digest that music. And so I would say that a lot of extended techniques aren't necessarily harmful per se. You just have to be very judicious about how you use it.
Thank you.
I see we have a question in the chat. So where is a good place to find pieces to work on these techniques? A good place to begin?
Ooh,
that's a hard question. That's a good one.
There is a book on Sprechstimme by Phyllis Brynjolfsson, who is like one of the definitive interpreters of Pierre Lunaire. So if you really want to take a deep dive into Sprechstimme, that's a really great book. It's called, I just Googled it, it's called Inside Pierre Lunaire, Performing the Sprechstimme in Schoenberg's Masterpiece by Phyllis Brynjolfsson. That is a really great resource for exploring that specific extended technique. As far as the others, I would say the best way to explore extended techniques is to get certain scores that have a lot of different extended techniques incorporated. So one really great piece, which I will put in the chat right now, is Luciano Berio's Sequenza 3 for solo voice. That has a very clear key, kind of similar to the keys that we showed you in the presentation. And all of the extended techniques are, if you take them in isolation, they're very accessible, and it's just a matter of the composite of all the extended techniques into the score. And it's for solo voice, it's unaccompanied, and you can take it at your own pace. But it's a really good way to start exploring these different timbres and then sewing them together into a piece.
Awesome. And yeah, Sequenza 3 is a really, really good one exactly for that reason, Felicia. Like, it's so, there's so much going on, but at the same time, it's at least for classically trained singers, it is accessible. I would say as well, recently, Anthony Green, actually the wonderful composer whose PS4 that you just heard, he recommended a book to me called The 21st Century Voice by Michael Edgerton. So I have not read it yet, but it does come highly recommended. So that's a good one as well. And Anya, wait, are you showing? Oh, that one, The Techniques of Singing.
I see a comment in the chat from Pam. As a composer, I suppose it depends on the singer whether they will welcome extended techniques in a new score. And I would say, like, yes, in like a very loose sort of way. Like, I think that composers shouldn't be afraid to use extended techniques for the most part, and singers shouldn't be afraid to try extended techniques for the most part. But again, it depends on like how you use the extended technique and how you write for it in the score. If you're doing Sprechstimme or certain kinds of different playing with like timbre and vibrato, that kind of stuff is super accessible for any classical singer. Even if they don't have experience with extended technique, it's something that's very teachable. And that's the thing with cultural awareness, right? Is that like there are some extended techniques that are ubiquitous among all cultures, like different timbres, different vibratos, the use of speech and whispering and different kinds of registers of your voice. But then there's, you know, other extended techniques that require a different kind of physical access and agility that can be taught, but it's a matter of like the singer's individual comfort level and what they're physically capable of doing. Is there anyone else who has any questions, either about extended techniques or any questions for me and Rose specifically?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. What about using instruments or other parts of the body for sounds making? I mean, it's totally possible. I have performed some pieces with actual percussion before where I have to play and sing at the same time. And in terms of using other parts of the body, like clapping and stomping, that's totally a thing as well. I do think, though, that there is another layer of complexity, of course, when you have the voice, when you're trying to do all this stuff with your voice and your body, and then you really have to like just then you add that other layer of complexity with playing an instrument as well, or with using your body. And so definitely possible, but it takes of course it takes more time. And when, for instance, when I've had to play percussion before, I've there is a learning process with that. It's not like I get a mallet, hit a vibraphone. Like there's actually technique deeply involved with that. So what I've tried to do in that situation is work with a percussionist, which I've been very lucky to do. um, really take the time to internalize both parts separately, um, and then put them together. But it's the type of thing that would definitely, at least for me, take longer to do than just trying to sight read it and put all of these layers and integrate all of these layers at once.
Yeah, just building off of that point, I think that having the singer do something simultaneously while singing is reasonable, but there's certain expectations, right? Like, don't expect a singer to play percussion like a percussionist or to play piano like a pianist. Like, I grew up playing piano and I also sing, but I rarely do both together because my brain isn't wired that way, because I learned to do both separately. So it's really interesting, like how how we approach like our different relationships with singing, with playing an instrument, with how we move our bodies. I see another question. Is there a voice teacher or program where you learned your skills that you could recommend? I would say that there are vocal teachers and coaches that specialize in contemporary music that could help you navigate a score. But in terms of techniques themselves, it is very, I think, self-exploratory, because again, like, the voice is your own individual instrument and it's so unique. I would say the thing that helped me with extended technique the most is being in settings where I can improvise and have the freedom to explore. So, I see, how does scat singing fit into extended technique, right? I mean, yeah, there's a lot to be said for the relationship between contemporary music and extended vocal technique and improvisation. I think they're all very much related, and really, in terms of like learning skills, right? I don't really think it's necessarily about learning a specific technique per se, as much as it is learning how to kind of shed our notion of what singing actually is and embrace the freedom to explore like the wholeness of our voices and what we have access to. So for me, it's more of a mindset than anything else. Scat can totally be considered extended technique. It's essentially vocal percussion.
Exactly. And I completely agree with you. I think that sure, we went to the Boco's Contemporary Performance Masters, but a lot of working with extended techniques is spending time by yourself, just trying things out and figuring out what works for you. Because as Felicia beautifully put earlier, like, each of us has a different body and each of us has a different experience and different ways that we do things. And there isn't a one size fits all approach. So while there definitely are teachers and coaches who might do more straight tone singing, or who might have experience integrating things like vocal fry, bel canto, straight tone, and aggressive singing in all within the span of 25 seconds, it really does come from just trying, at least for me as well, trying things out on my own, figuring out what feels good, and really taking the time. So it is, yeah, a lot of self-exploration.
I think also there's something to be said for just imitating any kind of sound, like when you hear it. So I have a 1-year-old baby, toddler now, I guess. But I'm so amazed by the the breadth of sounds that she's making, because she's not really thinking about speaking or singing or any kind of like specific vocal production. She's just like unconsciously imitating everything that she hears. And really, when we talk about extended technique and these sort of like unconventional or atypical sounds, we're really talking about sounds that aren't considered singing, right? And so, you know, just like embrace the sonic world around you, and try to be part of that, and try to imitate other instrument sounds and nature sounds, and you'll be surprised by how much your voice opens up.
Okay. So, wow, what a wonderful, what a rewarding time that was. Thank you both for sharing. Thank you for all of the work that you put into this workshop, and thank you so much for being willing to share it with us. Rose and Felicia, we really appreciate your work. And again, we appreciate your time with us. And there's plenty more of thank yous and accolades coming in the chat. Once again, to everyone, I'm going to let you all know about the blog. Rose and Felicia co-authored the blog for the month of for January, to accompany this workshop. And so just here in the chat, I'll put the link for you. But again, you can find the blog on the BSR website under the links for our different resources. And we would love to have you read that, share it with your friends, share it with others, and encourage them to become members of BSR if they're not already. Thank you all so much, and we are very glad that you were able to join us tonight, and we wish you all the best. Rose, Felicia, if there are any final remarks, you're welcome to make them at this time. But again, thank you so much, and it was really a wonderful experience.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming and for opening up your ears and hearts. You know, I hope that you walk away from this with inspiration and freedom to really explore your voice and your individuality in your music.
Exactly. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been such a joy to connect with all of you, and I hope that most importantly that you have fun, and that it's not about perfection or having the most like beautiful or the most ingressive vocalization possible. It's really about figuring out what feels best for you and your body, and taking it very playfully, very lightheartedly, and with a sense of joy, wonder, and curiosity. And Zachary, Margaret, Felicia, thank you all so much for Zachary and Margaret, thank you for facilitating this. And Felicia, just you're always such a fount of wisdom, knowledge, and just absolute warmth and compassion. So it's been such a joy to collaborate with you on this.
Thank you. Likewise. Everyone, have a good night. Stay safe. We'll return to normal soon.
Absolutely. And while you're at it, you can practice some of the techniques you've learned tonight.
We're all spending a lot of time at home.
Yes. Thank you both again. And thank you everyone for joining us. Good night.
Good night.